Hello and welcome to the Supervision of Peer Workforce Conference. I'm Brian with SHARE. This session is 5 evidence-based peer practices for supervisors. Ruth Hollman is the founder and chief executive officer of SHARE, the Self-Help and Recovery Exchange in Los Angeles, California, which has been providing peer services for 28 years with 54 employees in 3 locations. Thanks for showing up. We really appreciate it. And there will be a survey at the end, and we'd like your feedback. And also, if you could remain muted until there's a point of questions. And this is being recorded so that we can archive it and put it onto the website. If you don't want to be on camera, just please turn off your camera. And if you want to rename yourself, it's up to you. But go ahead, Ruth. Thank you.
Okay, so slide number 1. So slide number 1 is welcome, everybody.
All right.
Slide number 2 is we're going to be looking at 5 evidence-based practices, and they are, oh, of course, my phone is going to start going off as soon as we do this. Okay. They are the helper therapy principle, listening and disclosing. I'm trying to remember if it's recovery planning first or self-help support groups first, and then the last one is peer bridging. Okay, I'm not seeing the.
It'll be right there in a second, Ruth. I'm sorry, I needed to download it.
Okay. All right. So, well, let me share mine. No, mine's not going to be there. Okay. All right. Well, anyway, for each of these evidence-based practices, I'm going to define the practice. I am then going to tell you what the essential elements of it are, or and give you as a supervisor, you know, or somebody practicing it, so we're down to number 3 now. Okay, give you the key components of it, present evidence to support it, and then give the supervisor a key question to ask to easily identify if the practice is being implemented. And then I'm going to give examples of high implementation and low implementation of the practice. So as a supervisor, you can see whether or not there needs to be improvement in how the evidence-based practice is being presented. Okay, next slide. The helper therapy principle is the first one. So let's go to the slide after that. So the helper therapy principle states that the person who helps gets more out of the interaction than the person being helped. So if I'm helping someone, I actually benefit more than the person who I am helping or trying to help. So peers give the people they serve opportunities to help others so that they can get the benefits of helping. They also help others, and helping others has positive health, mental health benefits and heals the helper more than the person being helped. Creating opportunities for people to help improves their health, mental health, and self-esteem. And this is a very well-established principle. It was first identified in the 1960s. And why don't you go to the next one, and we'll get down to evidence in a minute. Okay, so the key component here is when people help others or even perceive they're helping others, they feel good about themselves in ways that improve their mental health, and functioning. Next slide. Okay, so evidence of this. When teens tutor younger children, the younger children's grades improve, but the teens' grades improve even more. And one of the first studies on this was where they looked at high school students with C averages tutoring junior high school students. Back in the day, it was junior high school, not middle school, but it's the same thing. Students also with C averages, and the junior high school students' grades went up to a B average, but the high school students who were providing the tutoring, theirs went up to an A average after tutoring. There's also a more recent study. A majority of community health workers felt helper benefits, including positive feelings about self, a sense of belonging, and valuable work experience when they were helping others. Recovery rates for alcoholics doubled if they were helping other alcoholics. So when somebody helps somebody else, they get more out of it, and they reinforce whatever they're helping the other person with in their own lives. Next slide. The helper's high is one of the other ways that the helper therapy principle is expressed. Helpers report a distinct physical sensation associated with helping. About half report that they experienced a high feeling. 43% felt stronger and more energetic. 28% felt warm. 22% felt calmer and less depressed. 21% experienced greater feelings of self-worth, and 13% experienced fewer aches and pains. So all of these studies are peer reviewed, not peer in the sense of a peer worker, but where they're academic studies and that they've been done with a control group, so that this is the highest level of evidence in science. Okay, next slide. So what is the key question? Is the peer letting the person help them or encouraging them to help others? Okay, that's the question. Is the peer letting the person help the peer, or are they encouraging them to help others? Next slide. So high implementation of the helper therapy principle would be the peer worker is adept at creating opportunities for people to be the person helping. For example, finding a skill that someone has and having them teach that skill to others. Teaching the person to use Word, Microsoft Word today, and having them train someone else in Word tomorrow. Getting people to volunteer in the community and also going to self-help support groups, because in the self-help support group, the helper therapy principle is maximized. Low implementation is where the peer worker lacks structure and approach to create leadership opportunities. The peer worker does projects and accomplishes things themselves, rather than giving others the satisfaction of being leaders and making a difference. Okay, so you see the two things there. Next slide. Okay, empowering others. So this would be if the peer worker is implementing the helper therapy principle well. So the peer worker listens for and implements participants' suggestions, such as having a Kwanzaa celebration, writing their legislative representative about something they wanted changed, starting their own business, putting on a program, inviting people to a recovery panel, etc. The peer worker lets the person help them. Low implementation, or where the performance of the helper therapy principle would need to be improved, would be when the only opportunities to help are those created by the staff or directed by the staff, and the peer worker sees their role as helping the person and rarely lets the person help them. Okay, next slide. So now we're at peer listening and disclosing. Next slide. Peer listening disclosing, the definition is using active listening techniques and sharing one's own experience of the situation a person is going through. And that's really important, that they are sharing their experience in relation to what the person they're dealing with is going through, not just, I'm going to tell you my story that may or may not be relevant to you. Peers do not give suggestions or advice unless specifically asked for it. And peer listening and disclosing is different from and complementary to clinical expertise because it represents a relationship of equals in which each, the peer worker and the person they're working with, is benefiting from the relationship with the other. Next slide. The key components, peer of listening and disclosing. Peers help others with similar challenges by understanding and sharing their own experience with I statements. This is really important. A peer worker should never be saying, you should do this or you should do that. It should all be, I did this and it was helpful to me. It might help you, maybe not. Okay? Peers listen fully the whole time the person is talking without thinking about what they may say in response. Only after the person stops talking does the peer respond. It is okay to have a few seconds of silence to gather thoughts. So there's been studies done on listening, and what they found is most people listen until they feel they've got the gist of what somebody is saying, and then they start to figure out how they're going to respond to the person, and then they may pick up at the end once they've figured out how they want to respond. And it's really important to listen to everything that's being said before formulating a response. And it's okay to tell people that that's what you're doing, that you want to listen fully before you respond. Peers disclose only those parts of their stories that speak directly to what the person has shared. We talked about that before. Okay, Brian, let's see if we can get this video going. Try going down to the bottom. There it was. Go. Can you click on that? All right. Well, we'll skip the video. It's just somebody talking about how important it is to do the do you have it? There we go. See if we can get it.
In the right situation, disclosing to a person is handing them a key that's allowing them to unlock themselves to share back with you. The best way to get somebody to feel you is to share. And when you share, it has to be honest. It has to be something that I can feel. There's no way to fake that. So disclosure is very important.
Okay, next slide. So what's the evidence for peer listening and disclosing? Peer listening and disclosing increases self-esteem and confidence, feelings of control and ability to make life changes, the sense of hope and inspiration, empathy and acceptance, engagement in self-care and wellness. It increases social support, social functioning, empowerment scores, and the sense that treatment is responsive and inclusive of needs. And this is from SAMHSA, so that's pretty neat. Okay, Next, we've got, next slide. Okay, so the key question for peer listening and disclosing is this peer specialist listening free from judgment or suggestion? Are they regularly sharing their own similar experiences in such a way that the person being supported feels connection and hope and is empowered to experience growth and change? Okay, next slide. So here is the high implementation. This is if it's being done properly. The peer worker discloses their own experience with similar issues, including how they felt, what they thought at the time, and what worked and what didn't work without being asked. They use I statements in disclosing. So one thing that's important is that peers don't give advice unless asked, but it's perfectly okay to disclose without being asked because I'm going to be using I statements about it. Low implementation that needs to be improved would be when the peer worker discloses only when asked and does not include their feelings or thoughts at the time that they were going through the same thing. They express their experience in the form of advice or say such things as, you should do what I did. That would be low implementation. Next slide. The other thing on peer listening and disclosing, high implementation, would be the peer worker discloses both their successes and their challenges, including current challenges that they are encountering in their recovery that relate to what the person is going through. So it's really important that people recognize that their peer worker is not perfect and that they're still dealing with life on life's terms. Low implementation would be when the peer worker only discloses their excesses and appears to be perfectly recovered without any problems. They hide their own setbacks from the people they are serving. Next slide. Okay, we're on the same one. Can we go to the next one? Okay. Ryan, we're on the same one. What happened? Whoops, we lost it altogether. Let's see if I can get to mine. Okay, now that we've gone past the video, we maybe do better on mine. Okay. And
Slide 23.
Slide 23, is it?
Yes.
Okay. Slide, no, it's not 23. We're still on peer. All right. That one we just did, 22. Okay, so the also high implementation. Okay, now it's taking me back here. Oh, the joys of Zoom and all right. So here is high implementation is when the peer worker is open about their lived experience, treats the person being served as an equal, and uses peer boundaries. The peer worker concentrates on connecting the person to non-paid social supports in the community. So peer boundaries are different than clinical boundaries in that there is support between the person and what is going on, okay? The low implementation, it's like there's a relationship there that is more than a professional relationship and involves, it's an authentic relationship where the peer is truly interested in what the person they're working with is talking about. The peer likes the person that they're working with. If they don't like the person, then they need to have a different peer working with them and can be present for what's going on. And that's a reciprocal relationship. Low implementation would be when the peer worker provides support using a clinical approach or clinical boundaries. The person's social network is limited to professional relationships and with other people attending the clinic. So it's not a bigger, there's not the bigger social supports in the community. You know, the goal of the peer worker is to connect the person to non-paid social supports in the community. That's what would be high implementation here. Okay, recovery planning. And are you seeing this? I'm not seeing you guys anymore, so I'm hoping that you're following. Recovery planning definition. Recovery planning is a way for a person to take charge of and control their recovery process by developing a written plan to help in their recovery. And there are two main recovery planning tools that are evidence-based. One is the Wellness Recovery Action Plan, which is a self-designed prevention and wellness process that anyone can use to get well, stay well, and make their life the way they want it to be. Most people, I think, are familiar with WRAP and that it's been linked to significant improvements in self-reported symptoms, recovery, hopefulness, self-advocacy, and physical health, and was listed on SAMHSA's National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices because of the research showing that it works. Okay. If you're not familiar with WRAP, there are several presentations today on WRAP that you can learn more about it. And you can also go to their website about it. But because most people know about it, I'm going over the ones that people don't tend to know. So that's SHARE's Plan for Success. So SHARE's Plan for Success creates a pathway from today to success in 5 years using backwards design. In backwards design, you start where you want to be in the future, 5 years from now, and you work backwards to get where you are today. And backwards design is an evidence-based best practice that is effective in helping people achieve their goals faster. It's a tool in management that they train in MBA programs. If you want to be a good manager, how do you reach your goals? You figure out what your goal is, and then instead of trying to draw it from today to 5 years, you go from 5 years to 4 years to 3 years to 2 years to 1 year, all the way down until you get to today. And when people make up their plan going backwards, they're more likely to achieve their goal. Okay, so how does SHARE's Plan for Success work? So it starts out by getting people to relax, close their eyes, take some deep breaths, making sure that they exhale fully, and then imagining where they would like to, imagining what life would look like now if they were successful in 5 years. I mean, what life would look like in 5 years if they were successful. So to imagine what they would be doing, what would make them feel proud, what would be worth celebrating, what would make them feel good, what would make them feel accomplished. And so dreaming of what would satisfy you in terms of being successful. So the answer here is not be a billionaire and in charge of your own mental health, whatever. It needs to be something, it needs to be what would satisfy, but not the highest place that you want to reach. Okay. And then you write it down on a plan for success sheet. So I'm going to give you an example of a plan for success that starts in 5 years. Okay. So this is what one of the sheets looks like. So at 5 years, living in Hawaii in a beach house that I own, working as a real estate agent. In 4 years, so that's going backwards, 4 years, I sell houses in Hawaii, saving all my commissions. I sell my condo and buy a beach house. In 3 years, I move to Hawaii with all my savings, buy a cheap condo to live in, get a Hawaiian real estate license, and start selling houses. In 2 years, I sell 20 houses in Los Angeles and save as much as I can. In 1 year, I get a job at a real estate agency and begin selling houses, saving every penny I can. At 9 months, I take the California real estate exam. At 6 months, I get a supervising real estate broker to sponsor me for my real estate license. At 3 months, I finish real estate school. At 2 months, I research real estate brokers to find ones likely to sponsor me. At 1 month, I continue at real estate school. At 2 weeks, I start real estate school. At 1 week, I fill out and submit real estate school applications. Tomorrow, I'm going to get all the documentation for my real estate school applications. And today, I'm going to research real estate schools in Los Angeles and pick one to apply to. Okay, so you see how you go backwards. But then once you've done that, you have everything that you need to do in terms of the goals you need to hit before you get to your 5-year plan. Okay, once the plan is developed, daily, weekly, or monthly commitments are made to a friend, a peer worker, case manager, or written down. There shouldn't be any consequence for not keeping a commitment, but lots of praise for any progress made. It's important to reframe attempts that did not work as learning opportunities rather than failures, and celebrating failures because of what we learned from them is also an evidence-based practice, but we won't talk about that more than what I just said. And what they have found about the plan for success, Cher's plan for success, is that most people achieve their 5-year success in 2 to 3 years once they've done that backward design thing. Okay, so effective ingredients for recovery planning. So high implementation would be the peer worker shows their own RAP plan and plan for success with their goals and commitments and talks about how it has helped them. They also talk about things that did not work out as planned and how they coped. Low implementation would be the peer worker gives someone the forms to use in recovery planning. The peer does not disclose their own recovery planning process or difficulties that they've had to overcome or are still working to overcome. More high implementation would be when the peer worker encourages the person to be ambitious and accepts the goals that the person wants to work on, even if they appear to be unrealistic. Low implementation is the peer worker tries to make sure that the person's goals are easily achievable and realistic to where they are now. Okay, and finally, high implementation is the peer worker supports the person in starting anywhere to reach their goals. If you're familiar with Procovery, that's one of the main principles of Procovery is just start anywhere. Low implementation is where the peer worker suggests what the next step towards the person's goal should be. So that goes into the advice giving stuff. Okay, so next we've got self-help support groups. So the American Psychological Association defines a self-help support group as a voluntary, self-determining, and nonprofit gathering of people who share a condition or status. Members share mutual support and experiential knowledge to improve persons' experiences of the common situation. The key components to self-help support groups are that everybody in the group is an equal. And that's where having somebody who is paid to run the group has been shown to diminish the outcomes of the self-help support group. So if paid peer staff are going to be in the meeting, they need to participate as a member of the group, not as the leader of the group. There's sharing or interaction between members. Decisions are made by the group members. Leadership is shared or rotated, so anybody could become the leader. And groups often use a written document called a format to explain the rules of the meeting at each session. So if you need formats for groups, Share can share with you the structure of self-help support groups, which is a publication that the American Psychological Association published on how to structure self-help support groups. And finally, safety and anonymity are projected. Okay, research on self-help support groups show that they cut the rehospitalization of mental health consumers by 50%. They reduce the number of days spent in the hospital by 1/3. They reduce significantly the amount of medication needed to treat mental health issues. And this is with the psychiatrists not knowing who was going to support groups and who wasn't. They totally reduced the amount of medication that they prescribed to the people who were in self-help support groups. The self-help support groups move large numbers of people out of the system into productive lives so that they're no longer a mental health consumer as their main identity for the rest of their lives. Participants are more likely to collaborate with clinical staff regarding taking medications. And wouldn't you know that my phone would be ringing? The effects of attending a self-help support group are realized in weeks. The changes happen quickly and are sustained for years. Self-help support groups reduce drug and alcohol abuse. They reduce demands on clinicians' time. They increase empowerment. They provide community support, the suspected reason that people in developing countries recover from schizophrenia at nearly twice the rate that they do in developed countries. Now, when we say recover, this was a World Health Organization study where the person never had another psychotic break after 2 years after their first one because of their community support. Okay. Self-help support groups provide mentoring opportunities that improve the outcomes of both the mentor and the person being mentored. So that's the helper therapy principle again there. They reduce criminal activities. They increase family resources and reduce family stress. And they increase consumer satisfaction. In fact, self-help support groups have the highest consumer satisfaction of any mental health intervention as measured by Consumer Reports. And self-help support groups are underutilized by clinicians because of incorrect preconceived ideas about self-help and the lack of professional training on self-help. So often you have to be in a position to train the rest of the professionals in an organization on self-help groups and how effective they are, and to meet, to listen to what preconceived ideas people may have and answer them so that clinicians are not discouraging people from attending. The key question for self-help support groups is the peer specialist attending self-help support groups and using their lived experience with them to give benefits of them to others. And interestingly enough, one of the best ways to increase resiliency and longevity in jobs is to have peer workers attend self-help support groups for themselves, because they get support there and are able to normalize what's going on at work, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, all of those great benefits there as well. Self-help support groups come in lots of different approaches. It's like And one of the things to know that is that 12-step is not the only way to overcome drug and alcohol issues. There are other programs that have been shown to work better for Buddhists, for atheists, for devout Christians, for African Americans, for women, etc. So it's important to match the person with the best, with the with their worldview. Okay, so there are more than 12,000 self-help support groups in Los Angeles alone, with 750 different foci or focuses, depending on whether you want to be a good Greek or a modern American. Self-help support groups work best when the worldview of the person is matched with a similar, with a group with a similar worldview. So, for example, 12-step programs are good for people with a belief in a single God, SOS for agnostics and atheists, Smart Recovery for people who don't want to share their personal business in public, Free in One for evangelical African Americans. You don't need to make an appointment or call beforehand. In most groups, people just show up at the day and time of the meeting, and either in person or online. Groups that have tools that help members change and grow are more effective. So if you can look for those, that's helpful. They're available in many languages, and it's easy to start a group in a language. If you don't have one, Share is happy to help with all of this. Most groups ask for a small donation between $1 and $5, but no one's turned away for lack of funds. The studies show that if people pay to go to the meeting, if they make a donation, they are more likely to attend regularly. They're more likely to do the things that are in the group versus if it's provided to them for free. And it's a good idea to get people to try a group 6 times before they decide if it's working for them, because the groups use experiential learning as the way that they teach, and most people are used to classroom learning, so they don't think they're getting anything out of it. But after six times of going to the group, all of a sudden they can see how their life has changed. So you can call Share to find out about self-help groups, and Share keeps track of a whole bunch of online support groups in California. So if you're looking for a particular group on any one issue, you can go to the Share website for online groups, or you can call Share at the toll-free number. Okay, so high implementation versus low implementation for self-help groups. So peers with the same power level, none of whom are paid, attend a support group addressing a common concern. Leadership and decision-making are provided by the members. Okay, low implementation is where paid peer specialists lead the groups and discussions and address disruptive behavior and make decisions for the group. High implementation is where referrals and information about community-based self-help support groups are available to all participants. Low implementation is when the groups are held only at a mental health facility and or are canceled when the room is needed for other purposes. High implementation is in self-help support groups, is when crosstalk is when others interrupt or comment on someone sharing. When crosstalk is not allowed and is enforced by any member of the group with gentle reminders, and anonymity is expected and protected. Low implementation is where the leader has the right to ask anyone to leave without hearing their side of the issue or giving them opportunities to improve. People who are not peer members of the group enter the group without the group's permission. Staff creates clinical notes about what happens in the group, identifying individuals or members needing to sign in. And all of these things on low implementation have been shown to negatively impact the outcomes that we saw earlier on from the self-help support groups. Okay, finally, each person has a right to due process in the group and is given opportunities to change disruptive behavior before the group takes action to exclude the member. If someone is asked to leave, it is only for 1 or 2 meetings and not forever. Low implementation is where disruptive people are banned from attending the group without being given a chance to change their behavior, and they might be excluded forever, which is not a best practice. Okay. There's nothing worse than going for help someplace and getting kicked out because you need too much help. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. Okay, so peer bridging. The definition of peer bridging is supporting a person in moving from one situation to another by a peer with similar experience. Examples of peer bridging are inpatient to outpatient, homelessness to housed, a jail or a prison inmate moving to the community. And these are not the only ones that there are for peer bridging. There can be others. So ideally, the peer bridger should get to know the person they're bridging before they're in the new situation. It's important to normalize people's fears, concerns, and feelings by having the peer worker disclose their similar lived experiences. The peer worker should connect people to self-help support groups so that they have people in similar situations and have role models of how they can move forward. They should use recovery planning to empower the person to move forward, and use the helper peer therapy principle, finding situations where the person being served is the one providing help to people in the community or whatever, or to the peer worker themselves or to other people in the same situation. And the peer bridger should serve as a support and a role model. Peer bridging evidence. Peer bridgers reduce rehospitalization by 50%. They reduce psychiatric emergency room use in favor of outpatient services, and they succeed in getting 60% of the people they're working with going to self-help support groups, which of course reduce the cost of treatment, increase employment, reduce drug and alcohol abuse, and everything else that we had above. Okay, the key question for peer bridging is the peer bridging empowering the person served and walking together as the person makes their own decisions in moving from one situation to another? And is the peer bridger using the helper therapy principle, listening and disclosing, recovery planning, and self-help support groups? So high implementation would be the peer worker integrates the practical parts of the change with their own experience with a similar change, including their feelings, hopes, fears, challenges, etc. They respect the feelings, fears, etc. of the person being served. Low implementation would be where the peer worker sees that the practical parts of the change are taken care of, but the peer worker does not connect with the person regarding their feelings, hopes, fears, and apprehensions. They reassure with little or no disclosing, oh, you're going to be okay, rather than, I really had a hard time when I first got out of the hospital because I was afraid I was just going to end up back there, and I felt safe at the hospital, and I just thought it was going to be too overwhelming not being in the hospital. Okay. More high implementation is the peer worker recognizes the individuality of the person they're working with and supports them where they are, even when they have different assessments of the situation and or different perspectives or worldviews. They recognize that everyone has a different recovery path. One size doesn't fit all. Low implementation is where the peer worker expects that the person they're working with has the same worldview as they do, and thus will handle the situation in a prescribed way. They may assume that the people need the same recovery tools that the peer worker has used. They judge the person served as wrong rather than as a human being able to make the best decisions for themselves. Okay, everybody's entitled to their own recovery journey. High implementation is where the peer worker sees their primary role as helping someone discover their own path to recovery, including setting their own goals, deciding what is important to them, and connecting the person to non-paid social support in the community. Low implementation is where the peer worker or peer bridger sees their primary role as solving the person problems and connecting them to other professional services. And finally, the high implementation is where the peer worker prioritizes the relationship with the person they are working with. Other issues are secondary. For example, the peer worker starts the session together with a check-in as to how things are going, including a short, honest update on their own recovery before moving to other issues and paperwork. Low implementation is where the peer worker is all business and struggles to build an authentic relationship with the person. Their focus is on checking off everything they need to get done with the person that day. Okay, so, and again, it's really important that when the check-in is being done, that the peer worker doesn't ignore problems they're having in their life, because that's part of life, is to continually have challenges that need to be faced. And if we put forward that everything's going to be perfect, that doesn't build resilience in the people we're dealing with. Okay, so that brings us to questions and answers, and thank you everybody for coming today. Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead.
Yes, I have a question.
Oh, okay.
Calling from Malaysia. It's 5 a.m. here right now. Okay. Anyway, I'm a peer, you can say a peer leader. I'm just wondering, because we, okay, I'm a peer leader, but I'm also giving peer counseling. So I have this issue because as a counselor, we need to have some boundary. I mean, that's what I've been learning. We need to have some boundary, and yet as a peer, we're supposed to be friends, right? Friends and equal. So how do I bridge these differences, this dichotomy?
So as a paid peer worker, I am never going to be able to be friends with the person, because a paid friend is not a friend. But I can fulfill some of the things that friends do. It's like I can listen to people. I can tell them about my experience. I can give them encouragement and support. But my real goal is to get them to have friends in the community. That's my goal, so that they have somebody they can call at 2 a.m. when they're having a bad night and can't sleep, or 5 a.m. as you are. Mm-hmm. And I want to just say thank you for your question. And I lived 3 years in Thailand, and once upon a time spoke Thai. So speaking up at a conference in a second language, I know how hard that is. And I really want to let you know that I appreciate you asking your question. So the idea is I'm not going to be a friend in the same way that an actual friend will be. What I want to do is direct that person in such a way that they can create friends through self-help support groups, volunteering in the community, getting to know other people. Does that help?
So my role as a peer, I don't have to be like equal peer, peer to peer. I thought that we are also supposed to be like equal and friends. Because what you're describing is like what a counselor should be.
No, it's what you're saying. The difference is that if you're paid to be a friend, you're not really a friend.
Oh,
okay.
Okay.
If you're paid to be a friend, you're not really a friend. So you want to do that as much as you can and be equal with the person. But the reality is that I can't be equal if I'm getting a paycheck and they're not. Right? So I want to do whatever I can to be a first person for them to trust. I need to be able to build that trust. But in the long run, I'm not going to be the best person to be their friend. They need to have real friends. So that's part of my job as well, is to give them a pathway to get real friends.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Naomi, did you have a question?
Yes, excellent presentation. I really found it very informative. There was this one section where was kind of surprising, was that you had mentioned about the self-help support group, where the non-paid peer specialist, or the peer facilitator, I guess, is maybe more effective with their facilitation and the support group. But then at the same time, I'm wondering, are they more sustainable because they're not getting paid? So will they not like show up, or they won't take it seriously? I'd like to hear your opinion.
Well, that's a very interesting thing. There's a study that shows if you have a paid facilitator, you have a 90% dropout rate in a support group. Whereas if you don't have a paid facilitator, you only have a 40% dropout rate. And that's where, because when you have a paid facilitator, if the person doesn't identify with the paid facilitator, they will not come back. Whereas when there's not a paid facilitator, if they identify with anyone in the group, they will come back. So it's interesting when they actually do these studies, what they come out with. And the other thing about the helper therapy principle is they find that if you ask people leaving a facilitated group where there's a paid person or somebody is supposed to be more knowledgeable than everybody else, if you ask them who helped who in the group, everybody reports that the facilitator helped people. When there isn't a facilitator there, all of a sudden the person says, well, my share helped this person, this person, this person, because rather than talking and trying to please the facilitator, they're talking to the whole group of people so that you maximize the helper therapy principle. And in fact, that's where they first discovered the helper therapy principle was in self-help support groups, because everybody in the group felt that they were helping other people there.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Gwen. I have my hand raised. I don't know if I was the next one. Am I the next one?
Yes.
Okay. I just have a comment about what you just said. When we started our organization, we didn't have any funding, and we had 100% volunteerism. Every position, everything that was done was volunteer for a whole year, and it was beautiful. It was like, if the phone ring, answer it. You know, if there's something on the floor, pick it up. You know, if coffee needs to be made, somebody make it. It was so much ownership and so much participation. It was wonderful. And then when we got grant funding and, you know, started the process of hiring and everything like that, oh my gosh, it changed.
Absolutely.
It changed. It was like, wait a minute, let's go back to all volunteers. But yeah, that helper therapy is huge. And given members, we call our participants members. We're family members. You know, everybody plays a role. Everybody voice matters. And when people feel like their voice matters, then they're more likely to stay engaged and participate. It's just from my experience.
So that's where it's really important that paid staff not wear a badge. That, or if they're wearing one, it's like we're required to have a badge on us at all time by our contract. Put it in your pocket. Oh, it just fell in there. You know, and that there isn't, you know, you want people to be able to walk in and not tell who works there and who doesn't. There shouldn't be a reception desk. You know, people should be just allowed to walk in and be part of, and it's really taught the paid staff about how they have to minimize their authority, that they shouldn't be ordering people around. You know, you never ask somebody, can I help you? You always say, if you need any help, I'm happy to help, you know, because can I help you says I'm in charge here. Whereas, you know, if you want any help, I'm here for you is a totally different experience. But yes, that's a major problem. You know, I was a volunteer for the first 4 years at Share, and I was the first person who got paid, you know, $1,000 a month, which wasn't much money, but boy, did it change how people saw who should be doing stuff at the center. And that is, you know, something that we really need more understanding about, how to maintain that peerness and, you know, including everyone in it. But we can do that by not putting together the program, you know, making sure that we're taking the ideas of the people in the community and giving them full credit for what's going on, and, you know, recognizing the way that it's like I tell my staff, your helper therapy principle is knowing that you're helping that person by letting them help you. You know, and if you can't get your head around that, if you have to be the one doing it, then you're not ready to work in this position. Naomi, did you have another question?
Yes, I'm sorry to ask all these questions.
No, it's good.
Yeah, so I'm just curious. I know that you have a lot of self-help groups. So are you telling me that every single one of them are volunteers?
Every single one of, yes, we don't have anybody. And it was like with our contracts with our county, we had to argue that that setting up the space for the self-help support group was actually providing a service to the clients, because they wanted our staff in the support groups. But you put staff in the support groups and you undo the benefits. In the cancer support groups, they actually undid the benefit of women with metastasized breast cancer living twice as long in the support group as those that weren't in the support group. Okay. They were able to undo that by just having a nurse in the meeting who was the expert. So it's important to argue when you're getting contracts that you want to, you know, you want to be there if there's a problem in the group. You want to be there to set the group up and to make sure that they have everything there. But please don't walk into the group, you know. Let them run it themselves.
But at the same time, aren't we trying to encourage certified, certification of peer specialists so that they can become more professional and be paid, right?
So, and I would argue that more professional is making sure people are getting into, right. So youth under 18, you're going to need Rainbows is a great support group for kids going through any sort of trauma. You're going to need an adult in that meeting to keep it going, but you got to make sure that the adult is running it as a self-help support group and not as a therapy group. So the answer here is you need everybody going to self-help support groups. You're not going to pay people to go to self-help support groups. You're not going to pay them to facilitate them. They can help with formats. They can publicize them. They can make referrals to them. They can help solve problems in the groups. They can, do all of these other things to support them. But in general, you don't want your peer worker in the support group unless they're attending as a member of the group and not the leader of the group. Dallas, did you have a question?
Yes. First of all, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I love that material and can't wait to get a copy of your slide deck. You mentioned just a moment ago that there was a study that had said that there was a like 90% retention rate with volunteer facilitation versus 40% retention rate or something like that.
No, dropout rate. So 90% dropout rate with paid facilitation and 40% dropout rate with unpaid facilitation.
Right. So I was wondering how I might get a copy
of that.
study.
Yeah. If you send me a email, I'm Ruth@shareselfhelp.org. I can send you a copy of that.
You are Ruth at say that again.
shareselfhelp.org. It's the same as the Share website.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, appreciate that, Ruth. I will definitely be sending you an email.
Now, that study says that the facilitated groups had better outcomes, but that's because the people doing it didn't look at, the 10%. If they had looked at the top 10% in the outcomes there and the top 10% in the unfacilitated group, those were equal. But the unfacilitated group had a lot more outcomes, even though they didn't reach the level of the professionally led one.
Gotcha. Understood.
Okay. So don't take it wrong when it says the facilitated group had better outcomes, because they didn't when you did it on one-on-one. They only did if you only looked at the 10% here. If you factored in the 90% that left who had no outcomes, it didn't work that way.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Any other questions? I think we're over time and the next one begins in a few minutes. So